Hello everyone, Reza here. Welcome to another XGen 101 video series. In this video, we are going to talk about XGen region control attributes, and we learn how to control primitives with Ptex Maps. So let's get to it. So I have a really simple geometry which I bent using a bend deformer. I tend to put my geometry on to a display layer. I named it plane_layer and templated the layer so I can freely select my sculpt tool, so I can actually go in there and sculpt and tweak my grooms. As you can see, these grooms are fairly simple. I made them from scratch and they're like manually created. What I tend to do and what I aim to do is not for all of them to, point the same direction and have a kind of boring flat look, but to give them a little bit of variety, and this naturally takes time. So get prepared to put on a good Spotify playlist and just sit in and tweak for a good half an hour, and maybe sometimes even hours if you work on a character. But once you reach a level that you like, you can go to XGen and let's talk about few attributes in here and see how we can benefit from generator attributes and primitive attributes. There's some really important ones in here that we need to know before we kind of dive into modifiers and add in modifiers to make the hair look more interesting. Now, the first part I would like to talk about is just generator attribute, specifically density. Now, density attribute controls the number of hair created by XGen over a given area. But remember, this is not number of hair. This is basically the amount of hair per Maya unit. So if you put in 100, you are not going to get 100 strands of hair. You are going to get 100 hair in 1 Maya unit. So as you can see, if I enable my grid, it's CM base and XGen is scene dependent. So before you put in any number, you kind of need to be aware of the measure or the unit that you're using for your XGen. Now, the next attribute is a mask, which is very, very important, and many attributes do have masks. Now, mask is a multiplier. Now, in this case, mask is a multiplier for our density. You can use an expression to define this mask. You can create a map to define the mask to how the distribution is going to be. And by the way, the map is naturally a black and white Ptex map, which you assign in here. Or you can just right click here and assign this, actually click on this gizmo here and just reset that to a slider, and that slider defines the distribution using the mask attribute. Now, the most common approach is to just create a map. So I'm going to remove the template from my display layer so I can select my geometry, switch back to XGen, and go in here right next to the expression button. There's a little triangle here. Click on it and go create map. Now, let's go through this really quickly because it's fairly straightforward. First is the map name, which I do use my description name for my mask. So I'm just going to start with mask _ base groom 01. I may have 02, 03, 04. So you need to be very descriptive with your map, and that will be saved, as you can see, inside your description, inside the paint maps folder with this particular name. Now, map resolution is a bit difficult to explain. Basically, it's a number of pixels per face the Ptex map will have. The higher resolution a texture is, the higher map you get, and as a result of that, a more accurate representation of the hair. So if you don't know what number you put in, you can just leave it as default and change that later. And this is in fact what I usually do. There's only one map that you cannot change after creation, and that's a region map, and we will talk about this later. But if you're tweaking density, you can actually leave that as 5 and then change that later. Sometimes you don't even need to change that. We'll see. Then we have start color. Obviously white means just business as usual. Take the entire geometry and have hair for the entire surface. If you set it to black, it starts with no hair whatsoever, and you be given the paint tool to paint the region that you would like to have the hair. So I'm gonna go create and gonna get rid of the hair representation. I'll be given this tool now. If I double click, you can see I have this 3D paint tool, and I hope you're all familiar with this. But let's go through some important key attributes in there before we just randomly paint weight. So the first one is the radius. Obviously, you can hold down B to change the radius. That's usually the standard keyboard for any fall off in any tool. We use the same for sculpting as well. Next one is the artisan, and that is actually quite important. What you always want to pick is solid brush, because the solid brush doesn't have a fall off. Remember, what you want is pure white. If you get gray, then you will be having hair but not as enough density, and that may create some artifacts. You may say, oh, I've got few strands of hair here and there, why can't I get rid of it? Probably because you used soft brush. So I always use solid brush. Then color, which you definitely want to have it set to white. You want to avoid gray, you want to avoid lower opacity if you want to really define the region that you want that hair to be in it. Then you can flood the whole surface with a particular color, and for example, if you flood this with 0.5, you get half of density. Simple as that. We can paint, we can erase, and then we can basically clone. You can blur, which I use from time to time for borders or regions that I want to have a little bit of blend. I use a blur brush, and that blurs it, blurs a particular line. Now to a very important part, which I noticed that many students kind of miss out of, is this file texture. Now I'm going to go ahead and set my brush to something like that, fix my camera angle, and kind of click once to get something. Now I noticed immediately that I'm not getting the result that I want in this area, so I'm going to go to erase, fix my brush, and just erase that area like so. If I go and preview XGen, you can see I'm not getting anything. Basically the whole surface is full of hair, and you may say, well, didn't we just paint a region? Why I'm getting this for the entire region? Well, there are two folds to this, two steps that you need to take to basically put that into practice. The first one is you need to save what you just painted. But you click on this save texture, you can see the prompt comes up, says that, okay, your texture has been saved on disk. Now the next one is, you can see now I have a path associated to the mask, but you need to save that one here. So next time you open Maya, you see both the disk file and the right path loaded in here. So I click, and as soon as I click, this right distribution of hair shows up. Now I'm only getting hair where I painted this map. So you can see how important this save texture button and paintable texture map button is. Now, if I zoom in, you may have noticed that the hair is not quite following the line that I created. It's because of this create map, sort of map resolution here that I have, that I defined previously. I mentioned that if you see fit, if the situation calls for it, you can actually go and change that. But you may have noticed that in generator attribute, we do not have any slider or any attribute to manually punch in numbers and change it, because if I select the selection tool, you can see that everything that we do stores in a map, and that map is also connected to the expression editor. I can click in here and you can see that map has been defined. It's in the description in the pane map, and it's called mask base groom 01. Now, if I look at this line right at the end, 5 is the resolution. So we use 3D map and the map resolution is set to 5. I can easily change that to 25. It's that simple. You go and you can save it manually if you want, or you can accept that. I'm going to go back and select the paintable texture map. I can see how this has been generated, set to 25. You can also go and save as this as a separate map if you would like to switch back and forth. But now the hair kind of follows the line more clearly. That's how you increase the resolution of your map. Now, with that one out of the way, let's move on to the next rollout, which is primitive attribute. I noticed that I have a really broken looking guides, and because of that, my hair is not as smooth. So you can see we've got some faceted edges on the hair and even faceted edges on the guide itself. Not to mention that shouldn't that hair follow the guide, but I think that volume, just the resolution is not high enough. So that brings me to this attribute here, modifier CV count. Usually CV count of 3 is way too low. I tend to start with 7 or 8 and crank it up to something like 25 or 30 only if I need to. But definitely 3 is low. So look at the silhouette and the curvature here. As soon as I move that to something like 9, you can see that the curvature now gets quite, you add volume to your hair and it follows the guide better. Well, that's very straightforward. Then we have length. As I said in the previous video, I usually tend not to tweak length. I only tweak the length of the guide so I know how long each hair is going to be. Width is something that I do change because I found out that kind of width of 0.1 is way too thick, especially for human hair. It just looks ridiculous. So I'm just going to start with 0.05, but I'm probably going to go lower than this. As a matter of fact, let's go lower than this. 0.02 would be a more realistic looking sort of result. Taper is something that we do need, and I've already applied that. I'm not going to go all the way 1. I'm going to go set it to 0.8 probably, and you do need that. So if you look at here, taper of 0, it's mainly for freshly cut hair, short hair. We have taper like that, but usually if there's long hair, hasn't been cut, you do have certain level of taper, and that's something that I do use. You can rebuild your guides, you can normalize your guides, and I talked about these two in previous videos, and we already talked about a tube groom in a separate video. Make sure to check it out. It's in the pop-up banner. Now with region map, we are going to talk about it in the next video. So that's pretty much it for this one. And now hopefully you know how to apply Ptex map to your attribute. By the way, the fact that I'm not seeing part of the hair, because in the preview output, only primitives in the view is selected. This means that if I zoom in and look at here, and now all of a sudden zoom back, I won't be able to see the rest of it. So I usually tend to turn this off, and now it shows me the full representation. That's pretty much it. We are going to talk about region map in the next video. So we have region control map that we need to talk about, which is quite an important topic. But for now, that should do it for this particular tutorial. I hope you find this tutorial useful. Comment in the description below if you have any questions, and I'm more than happy to get back to you guys as usual. So until the next video, see you guys soon.